"Your Honor," the voice, clear and steady, cut through the suffocating silence of the courtroom. It came from a boy, no older than 8, who stood on trembling legs, his eyes locked on the judge. "I'm my mom's lawyer." The words echoed through the room like a thunderclap on a clear day. Judge Eleanor Thompson, a woman whose 20 years on the bench had, she thought, shown her every possible permutation of human desperation and folly, stopped shuffling her papers. She looked up over the top of her reading glasses, her gaze sharp and questioning. The lawyer for the plaintiff, a man named Alastair Davies, dressed in a suit that cost more than the boy's mother earned in 6 months, let out a quiet, condescending chuckle. It was a sound designed to be just loud enough for the judge and the jury box to hear, a puff of derision meant to dismiss the entire affair as a circus. And the boy's mother, Sarah Evans, looked at her son, Leo, with a roiling cocktail of raw terror and blinding, fierce pride. Her heart felt like it was trying to beat its way out of her chest. "Son," Judge Thompson said, her voice laced with a patience she had to consciously summon from the depths of her professional decorum, "this is a court of law, not a school play. I appreciate your desire to help your mother, but this is not the proper venue. Please, take your seat." But the boy, Leo, didn't move. He clutched a faded yellow legal pad to his chest as if it were a shield, his small knuckles white. "I know, Your Honor," he said, his voice ringing with a conviction that made several adults in the room shift uncomfortably in the polished wooden benches. "But I have the right to be heard. My mom has the right to a defense. I'm here to present the evidence. My mom doesn't know how. But I do." The silence that followed was deafening, heavier than the thick oak paneling on the walls. It pressed in on everyone, a palpable force. What could this child possibly say? What evidence could he have on that scribbled-on notepad that a team of high-priced lawyers, or even a competent public defender, had missed? There, in that cold, sterile courtroom, a place of arcane rules and dispassionate procedure, everyone was about to witness something extraordinary. A boy, armed with nothing but the unvarnished truth, holding secrets capable of bringing down an empire built on lies and neglect. If this story of courage is already touching your heart, do us a favor and hit that like button and subscribe to the channel, because what this little boy was about to reveal would not only decide his family's fate, but would challenge the very foundations of justice in their small, overlooked city. To truly understand the monumental courage it took for 8-year-old Leo Evans to stand before Judge Thompson, you have to understand the world he and his mother, Sarah, had built for themselves. It was a small world, a fragile world, a world held together by love, sheer willpower, and the lingering scent of bacon grease from Sarah's double shifts at the Greasy Spoon Diner. Sarah was a single mom in the truest, most exhausting sense of the word. Her husband, a soldier, had passed away in a training accident when Leo was just 3, leaving a hole in their lives that could never be filled. Since then, Sarah was both protector and provider, a tireless warrior in a waitress's apron, working 60 hours a week just to keep their small, 2-bedroom apartment at the edge of town. The apartment itself was no palace. It was on the 3rd floor of a brick building named The Willows, though there wasn't a single willow tree in sight. The paint on the walls, a color that might once have been beige, now peeled in silent protest. The kitchen faucet maintained a constant, maddening drip that had become the unofficial metronome of their lives. In the winter, the old aluminum frame windows let in a draft so persistent that no amount of stuffed towels or taped-up plastic could stop it. But it was their home. It was the only home Leo had ever really known. It was where his crayon and watercolor drawings covered the refrigerator, a gallery of smiling suns and lopsided houses. It was where they had movie nights on their worn-out floral sofa, sharing a single bowl of popcorn, their laughter filling the small space and making it feel like a castle. Their world, though humble, was their own. But it was about to be shattered, not by a single, dramatic event, but by the slow, insidious creep of neglect. It started with a patch of black mold on the bathroom ceiling, a small, dark constellation above the shower. Sarah, ever responsible, reported it to the building superintendent, a grumpy, pot-bellied man named Frank, on her next rent day. "I'll get to it," he'd grunted, not even looking up from his crossword puzzle. Weeks turned into a month. The patch grew, spreading its ugly, dark fingers. Leo, who had always been a healthy kid, developed a cough. It started as a small, dry tickle in his throat, but it soon morphed into a deep, hacking sound that kept his mother awake at night, her ear pressed to his bedroom door, listening and worrying. The worry was a physical thing, a cold knot in her stomach. She called the owner, a man she'd never met named Mr. Henderson, directly. She found the number for Henderson Properties online and left a polite, then a firm, then a pleading voicemail. She wrote letters, sending them by certified mail so she'd have a record. The calls were never returned. The little green certified mail receipts came back, signed, but the silence from the owner's office was absolute. The final blow came on a Tuesday night during a ferocious winter storm. An old, corroded pipe, hidden within the wall of Leo's bedroom, finally gave up. It burst with a violent groan, sending a cascade of icy, rust-colored water down the wall, soaking the carpet, ruining his mattress, and, most devastatingly to Leo, destroying his most prized possessions, his collection of books. They were his escape, his adventure, his window to worlds beyond their peeling paint apartment. Now they were a soggy, warped, and ruined mess. Frantic, Sarah called the emergency maintenance line listed on her lease. It went straight to a full voicemail box. She called for 2 straight days. No one answered. No one called back. Finally, desperate and furious, she called the main office again and left a screaming, tearful message, threatening to call the city housing authority and every news station in town. That, finally, got a response. A plumber arrived the next day. He was sullen and rushed, cutting a hole in the drywall, fixing the pipe with a loud clang, and leaving the whole agape. He did nothing about the water damage, the ruined carpet, or the now thriving colony of black mold that was blooming across the damp wall like a monstrous flower. A week later, an official-looking envelope was taped to their door. It wasn't a response to her pleas for help. It was an eviction notice. It was cold, formal, and brutal. It claimed Sarah Evans was being evicted for non-payment of rent and willful destruction of property. Both were blatant, easily disprovable lies. She had every rent receipt, every cancelled check. The destruction was their fault, not hers. It was a clear, textbook case of retaliatory eviction. A punishment for daring to ask for a safe, habitable home. Sarah was terrified. The carefully constructed world she had built for her son was crumbling around her. She called legal aid, her voice trembling. The sympathetic but overworked woman on the other end of the line explained they had a 6-month waiting list for landlord-tenant disputes. 6 months. The eviction gave her 30 days. Sarah gathered her evidence, the rent receipts neatly filed in an accordion folder, the copies of her letters to Mr. Henderson, the certified mail stubs, and a gallery of photos on her phone showing the mold's progression and the water damage. Every night, long after she thought Leo was asleep, she would sit at the small kitchen table, the eviction notice spread before her like a death sentence, and cry silent, shoulder-shaking sobs into her hands. She cried for her son, for her late husband, for the sheer, crushing injustice of it all. But Leo wasn't always asleep. From the crack of his bedroom door, he watched. He was a quiet, observant child, and he saw the way his mother's shoulders slumped, the way her smile no longer reached her eyes. He watched the strongest person he knew crumble under the weight of an invisible enemy. He saw the eviction notice on the table, its bold, black letters a declaration of war on his family. He didn't understand all the words, but he understood the threat. He understood this piece of paper was trying to take their home away. And in his 8-year-old heart, a quiet observer decided to become a quiet warrior. Part 2, The Quiet Warrior's Arsenal. Leo's mission began in the hushed, sacred halls of the local public library. It was his second home, a place of endless possibility. While his mother thought he was in the children's section looking at picture books, he was on a covert operation. He started by asking the librarian, a kind woman with silver hair named Mrs. Gable, a question that made her pause. "Do you have any books about rules for apartments?" he'd asked, his voice barely a whisper. Mrs. Gable, intrigued, didn't treat him like a child. She saw the seriousness in his eyes. "You mean like a lease? Or tenant rights?" Leo nodded, not entirely sure what tenant meant, but the word rights sounded important. Mrs. Gable led him to a section he'd never seen before, a place with thick, boring-looking books. She pulled out a simplified guide, a pamphlet published by a local housing advocacy group. "This might be a little easier to understand," she said with a warm smile. "Let me know if you need help with any of the words." For the next 2 weeks, the library became Leo's war room. He devoured the pamphlet, then asked for more. Mrs. Gable, now a silent co-conspirator, found him websites for kids about the law, stories about famous court cases, and even a "For Dummies" book on civil law that he struggled through, his brow furrowed in concentration. He learned words like landlord, plaintiff, defendant, evidence, and his favorite, habitable. The law, he discovered, said his home had to be habitable. It had to be safe. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that their apartment was not. While his mom was at her long shifts at the diner, he would carefully spread her documents across the living room floor. He handled the papers with a reverence she would have found touching, the rent receipts, the certified mail stubs, the letters she had written. He took her phone and scrolled through the photos, his little face a mask of grim determination. On his faded yellow legal pad, the one he used for drawing superheroes, he began to build his case. He drew a timeline. A small dark spot on a drawing of a ceiling, with the date his mom first called the superintendent. A second drawing of the spot, but bigger, with the date she sent the first letter. A picture of a stick figure of himself, coughing, with a speech bubble that said, "Hack, hack." Next to each drawing, he meticulously wrote down dates and times, cross-referencing them with the letters and photos. He was creating a story told in pictures and dates, a story of neglect. Then, he found it. The smoking gun. It was a memory, at first. He remembered the day the plumber had left and the superintendent, Frank, had finally come to look at the gaping hole in his bedroom wall. Frank had been rude and dismissive, muttering about how some people were never satisfied. Leo remembered his mom had been on the verge of tears, arguing with him. And Leo had been sitting on the floor, playing a silly racing game on his mother's phone. He remembered Frank's loud, angry voice had startled him, and in his surprise, his thumb had slipped and hit a button on the side of the game screen. A little red circle had appeared. He hadn't known what it was, so he'd ignored it and kept playing. His heart started to pound. He grabbed his mom's phone. He knew how to get to the game, but he'd never looked for saved files before. He tapped around, his fingers flying across the screen. He found a folder labeled Recordings. And there it was. A single audio file, dated the day Frank had visited. It was 2 minutes and 14 seconds long. With trembling hands, he hit play. His mother's distressed voice came first, then Frank's gruff, dismissive tone. And then, the words that made the hair on Leo's arm stand up. "Look, lady," Frank's recorded voice snarled, "you people are always complaining about something. The faucet, the window, now this. Mr. Henderson is sick of it. He's running a business, not a charity. Maybe he'll just find a tenant who appreciates what they have and pays without making waves." Leo's eyes went wide. His heart hammered against his ribs. This was it. This was the proof. Frank had admitted it. The eviction wasn't about the rent, which they had always paid. It wasn't about the damage, which the burst pipe had caused. It was because his mom had complained. It was because she had asked for a safe home for him. He remembered reading a very important sentence in the library book: "It is illegal for a landlord to retaliate against a tenant for requesting repairs." Frank had just confessed to a crime. He listened to the recording a dozen times, memorizing the words. By the time the court date arrived, his yellow legal pad was no longer filled with superheroes. It was filled with a simple, powerful story of a broken home and a broken promise. It was filled with dates, facts, and a transcript of the recording. He was ready. He was ready to go to war for the only person who had ever gone to war for him. Sarah had no idea. She thought her son was just being sweet when he insisted on wearing his good shirt to court. She thought he was just being brave when he held her hand tightly as they walked into the intimidating courthouse. She had no lawyer, no plan, just a folder of papers and a heart full of despair. She was going to stand before the judge, tell her story, and pray for a miracle. She had no idea that her miracle was walking right beside her, clutching a yellow legal pad. Part 3, 2 Minutes of Truth. Back in the courtroom, Judge Thompson's patience, already thin, had worn out completely. "Young man," she said, her voice sharp and devoid of its earlier forced warmth, "I will not ask you again. Sit down. Now." Mr. Henderson's lawyer, Alastair Davies, saw his opening. He rose smoothly, a predator sensing a kill. "Your Honor," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, "while this is touching, in a theatrical sort of way, perhaps the court should take a brief recess to allow Ms. Evans to control her child. We have a schedule to keep." That tone. That dismissive, patronizing tone was the spark that ignited the dynamite. It was an insult not just to Leo, but to his mother. Leo stepped forward, his small shoes making a surprisingly loud sound on the courtroom floor. He reached the defendant's table and placed his legal pad on its polished surface with a definitive thud. "I am not out of control," he said, and his voice did not tremble. It rang with a startling clarity that commanded attention. "And my mom is not a liar." Judge Thompson stared at him, truly seeing him for the first time. This wasn't a childish tantrum. This wasn't a bid for attention. This was something else entirely. There was a gravity in the boy's posture, a fierce intelligence in his eyes. Against her better judgment, against decades of legal precedent and courtroom procedure, her curiosity won. A flicker of the woman she was before she was a judge, a mother, a grandmother, surfaced. "All right," she said, leaning forward, her elbows on the bench. The entire courtroom held its breath. "You have 2 minutes. The court's clock is running. Proceed." Leo nodded, his expression as grave as any seasoned attorney's. He didn't look at Mr. Davies or the empty plaintiff's chair where Mr. Henderson should have been. He looked directly at the judge, making a connection. "Mr. Davies says my mom didn't pay the rent," Leo began, his voice clear and articulate. "That's lie number 1. He walked to the court clerk, a middle-aged woman who looked at him with wide, astonished eyes, and handed her a neat stack of photocopied checks. He had made the copies himself at the library, feeding coins into the machine one by one. "Here are the cancelled checks from the bank for the last 3 years, all paid on time. My mom writes the check on the 1st of the month, every month." Mr. Davies's smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of irritation. He hadn't expected the woman to be this organized. "A clerical error, Your Honor, which we are happy to rectify," he said quickly. "The primary issue, the reason for the eviction, is the extensive property damage." "He means the water damage from the pipe and the black mold," Leo shot back, turning to a new, clean page in his notepad. "Mr. Davies says we caused it. That's lie number 2. He held up a photo, printed at the drugstore. It was a clear, damning picture. "My mom took this picture of the mold on March 12th and sent a letter to Mr. Henderson. And this picture is from April 5th. You can see it got bigger because he did nothing." He laid out a damning timeline of photos, copies of the letters, and the green certified mail stubs, creating a mosaic of neglect on the table before him. "The pipe burst on May 1st, Leo continued, his voice trembling slightly for the first time as he recalled the memory of his ruined books. "The water ruined my bed and all my books. We didn't cause the damage. The landlord's old pipes caused the damage. He held up the eviction notice. We got this on May 15th, 2 weeks after my mom called the emergency line and threatened to call the city. This isn't an eviction. It's a punishment. It's retaliation. He said the word he had learned from the library book, and it hung in the air, heavy with legal meaning. The courtroom was utterly, profoundly silent. The only sound was the frantic shuffling of Mr. Davies's pristine files. He was completely blindsided. He had come expecting to steamroll an unprepared, emotional single mother. He had not come prepared to face a tiny, meticulous prosecutor with a photographic memory and an ironclad timeline. And then, Leo delivered the final, devastating blow. I also have this, he said, pulling his mom's phone from his pocket. He fumbled for a second with the password, his hands suddenly slick with sweat. He found the file and hit play. The superintendent's gruff, angry voice filled the courtroom, amplified by the room's acoustics. You people are always complaining about something. Mr. Henderson is sick of it. Maybe he'll just find a tenant who appreciates what they have. A collective gasp went through the room. It was sharp, audible, a sudden intake of breath from 24 strangers. Alistair Davies's face went from pink to chalk white. Your Honor, this is completely inadmissible, he stammered, jumping to his feet. It's an illegal recording. My client's employee was recorded without his consent. Sit down, Mr. Davies, Judge Thompson snapped. Her voice was like the crack of a whip. Her eyes, which had been wide with astonishment, were now narrowed, fixed on the sputtering lawyer. In this state, as you should very well know, we are a one-party consent state. Only one party to the conversation needs to consent to a recording. And I believe the boy's mother was part of that conversation. The evidence is admissible.